What if I told you that the exact moment you begin reclaiming your power from a narcissist is the moment they become the most dangerous? There's something Carl Jung uncovered about the human psyche that narcissists exploit with unnerving precision, a truth that explains why your strength terrifies them far more than your weakness ever could. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you interpret every single manipulation tactic they've ever thrown at you. And by the end, you'll see why their final desperate move often ends up becoming the very key to your complete freedom. It's a profound transformation when someone starts to reclaim their true self after years of living under the psychological rule of a narcissist. According to Carl Jung, each of us carries a shadow, the denied, hidden, and undeveloped parts of our personality. But here's the insight most people overlook. Narcissists aren't just burdened by their shadow, they are consumed by it. The truth is, they're not only afraid of losing you, they're petrified of losing the fragile false self they've built. When they sense you breaking free and stepping into psychological independence, their fear of losing control doesn't just increase, it explodes. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But for narcissists, this kind of self-understanding is intolerable. Their fear isn't logical, it's existential. It shakes the very ground on which their identity is built. For them, control isn't just a habit, it's their entire identity. Jung found that when people refuse to face their own shadow, they inevitably project it onto others. The narcissist has built their whole persona on running from their darkness. And now, in your growth, you've become the mirror they cannot stand to face. Here's where it starts to make sense. Jung understood that when someone loses psychological control over another, it can trigger what he called ego dissolution anxiety. For a narcissist, this feels like death, not physical death, but the death of the false self they've been clinging to. You were never just a person in their life. In Jung's terms, you were their anima or animus, a living projection of their idealized or feared qualities. You were cast in a carefully crafted role designed to serve their inflated self-image. And when you step out of that role, you're not just changing behavior. You're collapsing the very structure they've built to avoid facing their own shame. Jung described narcissists as living in a state of psychological inflation, so identified with their persona that they've lost contact with their authentic self. Your independence reminds them of everything they've refused to become. Instead of letting it inspire growth, they respond with destruction. This independence happens quietly at first. You start making your own choices. You take longer to respond to their manipulative texts. You stop over-explaining. You refuse to apologize for things that aren't your responsibility. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming your authentic self. And to someone who lives in dependency, it's the ultimate threat. You begin to value your own needs over their expectations. You notice the interruptions, the dismissals, the way they rarely listen. You stop playing their emotional games. You detach from the constant need to manage their moods. Jung called this psychological differentiation, separating your inner world from their chaos. And this is when their mask slips. This is when you meet their real self. Not in vulnerability, but in anger, blame, and projection. They'll say you've changed. They'll suggest someone is influencing you. They'll rewrite your shared history. According to Jung, this is a defense against integration and a way to maintain their false narrative, because losing control of the story forces them to face themselves. Jung saw this as the tragedy of narcissism, that their authentic self still exists somewhere, buried under layers of fear, envy, and shame. But they refuse to dig it out. While you grow, they cling to the status quo that gives them power. And when direct control fails, they switch to what Jung would call false vulnerability. They appear broken, confessing old wounds, painting themselves as misunderstood. It's disarming because it feels like the openness you've been waiting for. But Jung recognized this as shadow projection through false intimacy, not a real breakthrough, but a calculated bid to pull you back in. They study your empathy the way a hunter studies prey. They map your emotional triggers, what inspires compassion, what makes you feel responsible for their pain. They'll say, "No one sees me like you do," or "You're the only one who truly understands me." Jung explained this as the rescue archetype, the deep drive to save and heal others. And if that doesn't work, they escalate to collective shadow projection, manipulating others against you. They seed doubt in friends, family, colleagues, anyone whose opinion matters to you. They frame themselves as the concerned, heartbroken party. Jung noted that people are drawn to simple narratives. And the narcissist offers an easy one. They're the victim. You're unstable. Doubt spreads, and before long, their story gains social validation. This isolates you and can even make you question yourself, exactly what they want. This is collective shadow manipulation, a way to make you dependent again by shaking your reality. If all else fails, they fully embody the victim archetype. Jung observed that people can become so consumed by an archetype, they start believing it themselves. This role shields them from blame and wins sympathy, buying them time to regroup. They retell your story, but twisted. Your growth becomes abandonment. Your boundaries become cruelty. Your independence becomes betrayal. And at the heart of it all lies projection, their final and most predictable trick. They accuse you of the very traits they fear in themselves. Jung understood. Projection is both a shield and a sword. It hides their flaws while attacking your confidence. The accusations hit deep because they target your worst self-doubts. This keeps you second-guessing your growth, wondering if they're right, losing the clarity you've worked so hard to build. Jung called this psychological destabilization, undermining your trust in your own perceptions until you're easier to control. But here's the turning point. Jung discovered that patterns repeat until they're made conscious. Narcissists rely on you not seeing the pattern, on you reacting to each tactic like it's new. The moment you recognize the cycle, you're no longer trapped inside it. You anticipate their moves. You know the sequence. After punishment comes charm. After boundaries come accusations. This is individuation in action, becoming aware of unconscious patterns and choosing your response. You're no longer a participant in their drama. You're an observer, steady and unshaken. And that terrifies them, because their biggest weapon, emotional surprise, no longer works. Your refusal to react becomes your greatest power. Narcissists feed on emotional chaos. It's their oxygen. Jung called the ability to stay centered in chaos psychological sovereignty. You no longer seek fairness from the unfair or validation from the manipulative. They may escalate, poke, guilt trip, accuse you of being cold. But this escalation is proof of their weakening hold. Without your emotional energy, they're left alone with their emptiness. Your calm becomes a mirror to their chaos. Jung understood that maturity means not needing others to regulate your emotions. And when you reach this point, you're immune to their games. You stop waiting for apologies, recognition, or closure. You see the truth. Their inability to value you has never been about you. Their stagnation is their burden, not yours. Your job is not to save them from themselves. It's to save yourself from their world. This is psychological freedom. You no longer wonder if you were too much or not enough. You see the full picture, the charm, the confusion, the guilt, the final lure, and you walk away knowing you won't step into that cycle again. This is psychological rebirth, shedding the false identity they imposed, and embracing your authentic self. You are no longer manageable. You are no longer theirs to control. And in this, their last trick becomes their ultimate failure, because individuation, becoming fully yourself, is the highest achievement. When you reclaim your clarity, you reveal their power for what it always was, borrowed from your confusion. Jung knew that manipulation only thrives in the dark. Once you bring it to light, it collapses. And here's the beauty. What they meant to use to pull you back ends up pushing you forward. What was supposed to trap you in doubt confirms your truth. What was designed to reassert control becomes undeniable proof that you've already taken it back. Real power, as Jung knew, isn't control over others. It's mastery over yourself. And your ultimate victory isn't in defeating them, but in outgrowing them, in becoming untouchable, in living as your authentic, sovereign self. Because the strength they feared most in you is exactly the strength that sets you free.